What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another e-commerce conversations. I hope all is well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the Internet from me, Ryan. Welcome, man.
What's up, man? What's up?
Making me look small. You got a freaking jacked over there, man. I got to steal your weightlifting routine.
When we get older, we got to try to do things. Midlife crisis, I think, used to be buying cars, obnoxious things, material items. I think now maybe for me, that's taken the shape of fitness.
Yeah. Get on that TRT, right? I'm holding out till 60 before I go on that TRT. It's definitely on my roadmap, you know.
Yeah, for sure. It's not on there, right?
Yeah. So for our listeners who don't know who the hell you are, why don't you give us a quick 30-second rundown of who you are and what you do?
Yes. Relevant to this, I spent 14 years in finance, which is largely irrelevant. Interesting things, but irrelevant. I co-founded a company called Factor, which is a meal delivery company, in 2013. So that's how I entered this space. Me and a friend from college, his idea actually, he brought me in before we launched the business. And that was the, hey, I'm super ignorant to all of this stuff moment. D2C only type of business. That went on to be acquired in 2020. I left the day-to-day in 2017 and have been involved in a lot of consumer businesses ever since, ranging from food and beverage mainly. I'll put it that way, food and beverage, but all consumer. And so I've worked in-house, out-house, consultant, full-time, et cetera, et cetera. The last role that I was in before MALK, which I'll get to, is High Key, which was a keto cookie company. I ended up I was the CMO at one point and then the CEO, and then more recently joined MALK as their president. So I oversee sales, marketing, and data, basically our category management function. So I took that almost a year ago.
So pretty much, in my opinion, some of the hardest industries, like I cannot imagine these businesses are easy to run. In fact, like, are any of the meal delivery businesses making money, or?
Factor
Factor is the token?
Factor is the only one. It's really interesting because we were very ignorant on all things. First ignorant piece was we thought we could self-fund the business. I'm not, all these binary conversations, you should or you shouldn't. It really depends. Like, what are the margin profile? How long does it take to get to scale? When can you juice margins? For meal delivery, it's much more like a restaurant. At scale, you can get 10, 15% net margins, but that's at scale. So we had money from a previous life. We used way too much of our own money to fund the business because we were ignorant to that fact. And so when we started looking to raise capital, the institutional dollars we were trying to raise didn't want to fund our business because they thought the meal kit companies, so Blue Apron and Plated and HelloFresh, were way too far out in front of us, and they were heavily venture backed. We argued we weren't the same business model by any stretch of the imagination, and I would still argue that today, and now we know. Because Factor was actually acquired by HelloFresh, but so we can see in their public company, we can see the financials and who's driving the profit of that business. But even before that, Blue Apron went public. And Blue Apron, we could see lifetime value of a customer of a meal kit company, which is just sending you the ingredients and you cook it at home, versus a meal delivery company or ready to eat meal, which is a full meal, in your microwave. And so I don't believe that any meal kit companies are, although I could be very wrong. I don't have line of sight into all of it, but Factor at least is driving a ton of profit dollars.
Yeah, because you can better systematize, produce, have the productions, the commodities of sizing and things like that to optimize and scale up in that business. Am I correct in that regard? Those are the major players, or?
Yes, but I think the bigger driver is LTV, truly. Okay. I mean, it's a convenience. One doesn't offer a convenience factor and one does. Right, I think the meal kit companies, when they said, hey, we'll send you all the ingredients so you don't have to think about recipes and you can cook it at home, that's really an experiential type of value proposition. Like, I do like to cook, but I don't want to think about which recipes, and I don't want to figure out which ingredients I need and then cut them all up and all of that. But when you remove the convenience element, I'm still 45 minutes from a meal the moment I get that box. with a
meal
ready
and
to eat
cleaning
meal.
it up too.
For sure. A ready to eat meal is like inherent convenience inside of that. So when we were raising that money and we were saying, hey, we believe we have a much higher lifetime value. This is revenue and the gross margins of that business are not high. So we can get to that. But we were like a $1,500, $1,600 gross revenue LTV. Right. And theirs, at least when Blue Apron Republic was, half of that. So I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. Is like a customer is much more likely to stay a lot longer in a ready to eat meal company than they are a meal kit company.
I've seen a lot of Factor on YouTube doing influencer content. Was that part of your strategy when you were on the team, or is that something they rolled out since?
It was, but it was early. And they've rolled a ton out since. I mean, I've heard their revenues now in the multiple billions of dollars. $2 billion. So, they have a ton of money, they have a ton of profit, they have a ton of access to whomever they want. When we were running the business, at one point I was running our ads because, early founder, you don't know anything. We didn't have any money really in the business. And so we had to do all the things ourselves, as you very well know. But that was early days of Facebook. It was cheap, right? Whitelisting, all these little things that came out for the first time and had a massive arbitrage, like just Facebook in general. Was huge. Like I thought I was a great media buyer just because it was super cheap and super new. Then you could whitelist. We started to do some influencer stuff, but it was mainly whitelisting at the time, call it 2016, 17, like just whitelisting gave you this massive opportunity to get cheap clicks. So we didn't have to lean so far into, we weren't spending tons and tons of money such that we needed to find another channel. Like we could really grow the way we wanted to at the efficiencies that we wanted to just using Google and Facebook and a little bit of influencer, but through whitelisting.
How, so you exited that. I assume you took a little bit of time off. You worked on some projects, helped others. How did you fall into your current role at MALK?
Yeah, so I left Factor before it got acquired. So the long story short is I sold my equity before the big payday. I had put myself in a really tough financial situation. So did the true founder of the business. We had self-funded a lot of the business. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of secondaries. It was a different world then where there wasn't secondary transactions being done where founders were taking money off the table nearly as often. And that business profile didn't really line up for that. And so I left the day-to-day for a number of different reasons, but in large part because my personal P&L was completely upside down. My personal balance sheet, like way in personal debt. The business was running and it was going very, very well, but we couldn't monetize that. We finally just started paying ourselves a salary 3.5 years into the business, instead of putting all of our own money in. So long story short, I left in 2017. I wanted to sell. I owned 17% of the business. I wanted to sell half-ish, get myself out of debt, and then keep the rest for upside. I got one offer, basically, from one of our investors who was a distressed M&A banker, and his whole life lens was distressed M&A. So he was like, I know what you're trying to get. I'll give you all or nothing, basically, sort of pennies on the dollar type of situation. And so I took it. Got myself out of debt, great, moved on. But I did not have this large, everyone else that retained their equity made a lot of money on that transaction and I didn't. So I was never in a situation where I was like, hey, what should I do with my life? I can do whatever I want. Let me take a year off. Let me take 6 months off. I sort of was back on it from the moment that I left. So that leads to like, hey, I was working as a consultant. I was working in-house, out-house, a lot of different businesses. And have just established myself in CPG, I guess. And so the way I got to MALK was the CEO was brought in 2020. So it was founded in 2015, sort of founder story. She started making this back in her house, selling it at farmers markets. In 2020, Jason Bronstedt took over as CEO. Jason and I are friends, have known each other since about 2019. And when we sold High Key, him and I just started chatting. And sort of one thing led to another, and I saw under the hood of the business, he's like, I think we could really use someone with your skill set to help me run the commercial side of this business. And of course, I think like everyone in CPG or in consumer in general, I was not going to stay in consumer. It's so hard. It's just a challenge. And so I was like, I'm going to do something different. But the more I started looking at this business, the more interested I got. And so that's how the short version of how we got here.
Yeah, so I was doing a little bit of digging. It looks like the company's quite interesting because you have a FAQ and you talk about like apparently you guys tried like different vanilla flavoring. You tried, it sounds like you went from like sprouted almonds to, I guess ordinary almonds, and just kind of like nuance that I would imagine mainstream consumers really don't notice or care about. But it seems like you guys have really attracted health conscious people who are very intentional with the things they put in there. Can you walk me through some of that kind of like drama as you guys optimize your formulation?
Yes, I think that story starts with the plant-based milk, at least, category. This analog probably plays through to all plant-based things. And if we're being honest, every trend, keto, gluten-free, whatever. And what I mean by that is when you come out with a gluten-free thing and gluten-free is the trend or keto is the thread, the trend, the value proposition, sometimes the problem you attempt to solve as a business is moving people to gluten-free or keto. You should be gluten-free. And I think the challenge that a lot of messaging from companies makes, the problem is they say, if you're gluten-free, you're healthy. It's not at the ingredient level, right? It's just like, hey, it's gluten-free. We know this, right? This is used all over the place. It's happened in all of these trends. So plant-based milk really became popular through Oatly, I would say, was the biggest content engine behind making plant-based milk like a really
I'd say like cool, because like
Yeah,
silk's been
sure.
around forever, but silk
Totally.
is like the bad stuff that you have to go with because you can't get the
100%.
you're lactose intolerant, so you have to go silk.
100%. So Oatly probably tried to bring it to the masses instead of you have an aversion to dairy. This was like, hey, you should drink oat milk because it doesn't have dairy in it, and this is what you should do. So I'd say plant-based milk became popular through a messaging around it just being healthier than dairy, not unlike what I just said about gluten-free or keto. Whereas if you get to the ingredient deck on some of these, you would realize that like it's not necessarily healthy for you. It's just not dairy, and those are two very different things. So Malk was started under the guise and premise of organic, clean ingredient, healthy, delicious plant-based milk. Right? And that is the value proposition because there's not a lot of them. Since Malk has gotten popular, obviously some competitors are coming our way, and that's normal. But that is where Malk started. That's the consumer we went after and we got, and that's how we started getting traction. So yes, we moved to natural flavors at one point in our formulation, and the Malk consumer went, what, apeshit. Will not have it, right? And so
Did you see it just from like people bitching on the internet, or was
Yes.
it like sales imploded?
There wasn't both, but really it was the reaction of people online. And what's interesting for me, especially my arc, as you think about, Factor was only D2C, so I cut my teeth during the D2C boom on a D2C only business because there wasn't even options for other channels of distribution. And every business I've been at has been less and less online to now Malk, which is 100% retail. And I bring that up because the feedback loop when you're a retail-only business is significantly longer and extended. When you're selling online, you're selling a ton of orders. You're getting that customer service inbox is getting pinged with everything, right, wrong, or indifferent on their reaction to this. In a retail-only, the number of consumers who are willing to go to your website, buy you in retail, go to your website, find the customer support email address, and then send you a proactive email is just less. So we certainly got a ton of those, but it was really the reaction on socials. That's our feedback loop of people being like, I cannot believe you're basically turning your back on who you are as a brand and what your promise is.
Well, I mean, like one of your taglines is like turn the label around or what?
Yeah.
So like you're telling people to look at the ingredients. When the ingredients change, like to a certain degree, you guys are painting yourself into a corner with your business decision. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it makes it harder because you are going to be handcuffing the growth. Talk about that strategy. You have a premium price point product that's 4 times more expensive than the generics on the shelf. How do you view that as a growth opportunity with the business, and how did you guys come to that decision to really focus on that premium end?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, on the one hand, from an ingredient perspective, sort of where I think you're going, or at least where we talk about is logic and emotion are two very different things. And if a consumer's thinking they're not always thinking logically. They're thinking emotionally. And they're also beholden to whoever told them or whatever they read online about what is or isn't healthy, quote unquote. And obviously there's a ton of gray in that. So the idea, I was not here at the time that they moved to natural ingredients or natural flavors, but in their head, this wasn't this massive thing. If you look at with some of these natural flavors, this is not heavily processed stuff, right? Like, so didn't think it was that big of a deal, but the emotion of the consumer, regardless of the logic, was, yeah, well, holy shit, I cannot believe you're now putting these things in your clean plant-based milk. So that's a whole conversation of like, what is and what isn't healthy is in the eye of the beholder, right? And logic doesn't always trump. The decision was made. We are right now the only pure, clean label organic plant-based milk, and it's continuing to have super high velocities, even though it has a premium price point. So I think that it's tough in a lot of other categories. It would be tough in this category if we were third or fourth or fifth to the game, but because we were early, that's where timing matters so much, right? The consumer clearly, and if you look at the subcategory of clean label organic, plant-based milk as a category is down 4 or 5% year over year. This is the last couple of years running. Organic clean label is up 25% and we're up 45%. So clearly there's a moment now where the consumer, and this is where timing's so important. Like if what I'm saying is true, and who the hell knows, but if Oatly made plant-based milk, and not to pick on them, but if they're the ones that put the media and the marketing behind this messaging of like, hey, you should drink plant-based milk because it's not dairy, and they made it a little bit more mass appeal and brought awareness to the category, then everyone started turning the label around and they're like, oh, well, some of these things my own personal choice, do not like to put into my body. What else is there? I now have made it a habit to drink oat milk, almond milk, coconut milk, whatever it may be. And now I'm realizing some of these things I don't agree with. Who else is out there? And MALK was the only one out there at the time that had wide distribution. And so could we start MALK today with the same price point, the same value proposition if MALK was already out there? Probably not. Right? So that's why I think it's a timing thing. And yes, it's limiting. It's limiting in creamers. We're in a creamer category. It's limiting to make it look as creamy and thick and all the things that you want it to be. But it is the value proposition that we have, and we believe based on the data that the consumer is continuing to move in that direction in this category. And so we're going to push into it.
Do you guys see more top end potential in the creamer category than in the plant-based milk category? Because it just seems like in the creamer category, like there's literally nothing available without seed oils in there.
Yes.
And you guys, as you've already mentioned multiple times, have a really nice label on your ingredient.
Yeah, I think yes. Short answer is yes. I think creamer category is behind the plant-based milk category. And I think the shelf stable, that's these right here. So that's just shelf stable, same liquid in the bottle, just not in a refrigerator. That's actually opened up e-commerce to us, which is great. I think both creamers and shelf stable plant-based milks are behind the refrigerated plant-based milk curve in that they are now the consumer in those subcategories are looking for a cleaner label version of what they were drinking before. And I think that there's others, right? And so we have plans for those, but 100%. I don't think it's every beverage in food. As you and I both well know, many brands during the height of the D2C bubble, the consumer bubble, came to market and were able to get some sort of traction with a super premium, very clean ingredient products, but not all of them made that jump to retail. Most of them, I would say, did not make that jump to retail because of price point, because their value proposition isn't there. So I don't think it's a holistic stance that just the consumer's looking for clean label everything. I think in ours, based on the data, it is. And so we're going to find where we believe those other subcategories within this space are, like creamers, to your point. Yes, I 100% believe the data is telling us that consumers go in the same direction that they were in plant-based milk. And so that's why we went into that market.
So you guys have grown primarily through the distribution channel. Can you walk me through how to build that program and how to scale that up?
Yeah, it's pretty by the book, quote unquote, for a better for you product, meaning you start in natural, the natural retailers like Whole Foods, natural grocers, Sprouts, right? And a lot of other smaller shops, but those being three large ones where that consumer and that retail buyer understand what their consumer wants, which is they're willing to pay a premium for healthier stuff. We could get into, conversations about the types of things in Whole Foods and Sprouts and whether they're healthy or not. But again, that doesn't really matter. We started in natural, got a lot of traction in natural. And then for the SKUs that were in natural, performed well, we then got some doors in conventional. Conventionals being Kroger, Albertsons, Target, right? So if you take that playbook and say, okay, say you have one SKU, best to go prove it in natural. If you prove it in natural, you can approach conventional and say, hey, look how well this does in natural. Give us some of your 1,000 doors or 1,500 doors next year, and let's prove out in those stores. And then hopefully you can get a bunch more doors the following year. And then rinse and repeat. Literally, we've just done that. We put our almond and oat milks, which are the only ones that we had, in natural. They did very, very well. We approached conventional. They gave us some doors on a few of those SKUs. We won with those SKUs and those doors. They gave us more doors and more SKUs. So that's just we took creamers, launched them into natural last year, Whole Foods and Sprouts. They did very, very well. So when last year the review and reset conversations happened at conventional, we said, you should take a look at our creamers. Hopefully that gave us a few doors, which they did. And then, we're just starting back. So anything new that we launch, we just start that whole process all over again.
How do you get in front of buyers? Are you guys working with an agent or
we have a broker?
Doors?
We have brokers, yes. I think we're at this point now where this is very old school CPG. And I say this as someone that didn't grow up in CPG. I literally grew up in D2C, right? And so, but old school CPG, before the internet was a thing and online was a thing, this was the only playbook. You could go meet, you would build a sales team first. Obviously, you'd build a product first. Then you'd have a sales team, in-house or out-house, and you would bring on salespeople who had relationships at retailers with the buyers. So hopefully they could use that as leverage to get in. So we've done that. The sales team was larger, faster, more mature than every other function of this business for a number of years because of that. So it's a mix. We certainly use brokers, brokers who have relationships with retail buyers. And by now, in some of these, we have such deep relationships all the way up the chain with a Sprouts, with a Whole Foods, even with a Kroger, with a Publix, where we still use a broker, but we have a relationship with our salesperson and probably all the way up between Jason and I with some of the executives at those retailers.
So walk me through that process of finding that right salesperson. How do you win them onto your team? How do you hire them? How do you hold them accountable? What does success look like? And what does failure look like? How much runway do you need to give? So if someone's primarily a D2C business and they want to go down the chain, how would they actually build that out internally?
Yeah, I think there's a couple options. As with everything else, I would consider fractional sales companies. Fractional is a big thing now. We all know that with in a lot of different areas, and we could go back and forth about the success or failure. It totally depends who you're hiring, where your business is. But I would consider that. At the end of the day, you need people with relationships at the retail level, period, right? And so if you can find someone and you can pay them, a good one who has clear relationships with people at those retailers, then you bring them on. And if you have enough money to make it worth their while, or equity, or whatever, all the variables, then do that. If not, then consider one of those. You need relationships. They need to have a one-on-one relationship with the buyer, or you can go the broker route, same thing. They got to have relationships with the buyers and have proven. So figure out how you can prove that they've done that. Talk to their old customers, right? Et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, it's about, can you get meetings? The retail calendar is what it is. Once a year, for most major retailers, they are going to review their entire shelf and they're going to make decisions on it. So you want to know when that is. If you're a better for you brand and you say Whole Foods and Sprouts, the natural channel, i.e. is probably our best first leg into retail, then I would understand when the reset period is for your category. A little bit of online research will get you very far. And then go find someone who has relationships at those retailers, right? And then holding accountable is, are we getting meetings? Like, are we going to be a part of this review, period, right? And then the other success metric is, can they build a story around that? Do they understand what the buyer is looking for? And then, part of the recruiting process is going to be, do you have an actual story to tell? If I'm a great salesperson with relationships at Whole Foods and you come to me as a new brand and I say, yeah, I've had these relationships forever, I would ask you, and this would be part of the interview process, is how do you build a story around this? And you have to understand what they're going to ask you, the salesperson, right? How can we prove that we can go turn at this level? So that's the success metric, is like, can you get in the review period, and then can you go craft a story? What's the deck you're going to put, the presentation you're going to put in front of that buyer? And then ultimately, like, did we win or not?
Yeah. So a couple of things. A, with the natural retailers, do you need to be EDI compliant for that, or?
Yes, because most of them use, most of them will use distributors.
Okay. So EDI, and I'm not an ops guy, so I'm going to misspeak on it, but basically it's the software that ties everything together to help retailers order products. If you have like small independent, pharmacies or grocers, they may not have that requirement, but at any kind of large scale, the expectation is going to be there, and it is operationally a challenge to build that out. So if you're not aware of that or prepared for that, certainly you have to plan on that and come up with a system for how you're going to be rolling out your I guess it's called EDI compliance. I could be misspeaking on it. But the other thing I want to talk about is the story to your consumers. Is that a different story than what you're telling to the buyer?
Partly, right? To the buyer, to the consumer, we've covered that. Like, we believe this is a white space, so we tell that story. We believe you should get clean label, organic, delicious, same. To the buyer, it's going to be partly that, right? We believe the consumer is looking for this. This is what we bring. But a lot of it eventually becomes around, what are they looking for? I mean, it's sales. Sales 101, like, what is their agenda? Their agenda is to sell the most dollars with the shelf space that they have that they possibly can. So your story needs to be around, you can sell more dollars than who they're going to replace you with, or the reverse, right? Who's going to come out when you go in. So it ends up being, here's what we think we will turn. Here's the more dollars you're going to get for per inch of square shelf space. But then there's an element of like, where's this category going and how can we prove it? Right? So we believe you will be, there's a FOMO element that's involved that says, hey, these other retailers are making the move into this thing that we have and you are not. Why? And here's how they're doing elsewhere. So again, there's money in this, as you very well know. You talked about building out a supply chain, an ERP with EDI that has all of this, that is not as easy as just popping up a D2C, a Shopify site or an Amazon site. It requires more people and more complexity. But that's what it comes down to, is saying, like, we believe that this category we're in, the consumers are looking for. If you have proof points that can show that. Other retailers are getting into it. That's the FOMO element. There's a dollars and cents element to it. And you don't want to be the one left behind. And then the other part of that just going to be like, we can fulfill. We can deliver. There's times you can win shelf space from a competitor just by saying we will be on time and full. So they're going to want to know all that stuff too, right? If we place POs, can you fulfill them? And is there any chance you'll be out of stock with these things? Let's
talk about what happens. Obviously, you need a good product. A good product is going to be your number one savior for most things in the retail shelves. But let's say you have a good product, but it's not getting the traction that you expected. What are some tactics or techniques to better improve your sell-through rates for your product in retail?
Yeah, packaging. I mean, when I talk a lot about it, again, it's been a journey for me. Understanding, I didn't come up in CPG retail, but I've been much more exposed to it over the last 6 years than I was the first 5 years in the game for me, being D2C only. Packaging doesn't matter that much online. You could argue it does in Amazon. It certainly matters more if you think of retail. I think Amazon acts much more like retail than D2C does. In that, like, there's a search results page, and we know the main image on Amazon. We talk about the main image being super, super important. That's packaging on the retail shelf, right? You're getting eyeballs from a lot of high intent purchasers when you're on shelf. So the most important thing you can do is your packaging. What is your value proposition? Does it pop? Does it stand out? Are your value propositions clear? That is the number one thing you can do. I think from a marketing dollars perspective, I would say the same thing. The closer to point of sale that you can get, the better as an early stage brand. So if you take the example that I just gave, which is you have a ton of traffic and they're all high intent because they're walking the shelves, then packaging's got to be important, and then anything you can do at point of sale is going to help you much more, I think, than trying to generate awareness through paid social or search or whatever else you may be using. So there's a number of tactics that you can use. Obviously, you can do discounting on shelf. If those come with tags at the retailer, great. You can put tags on it, right? You can put shelf tags. You can pay for neck hangers, which in our world is just hanging something on the bottle itself. If you're not in the refrigerator, you can do off-shelf displays. Shippers, which is just the big thing if someone has you at the end of an aisle in your own branded thing and all of yours are lined up on that. All of things are just to catch the eye of the consumer. So when we talk online about stopping the scroll on paid social, for example, it's not that different. It's just you do different things in order to get that. You're not trying to stop the scroll. You're trying to stop them in their tracks while they're walking the aisle. And more than likely, the best use of your dollars is going to be as close to point of sale as possible. It doesn't have to be discounting, but it could be, right? But there's a lot of things in store. So if I'm new and I'm saying, hey, I go to the retailer and I say, what are the in-store menu of options that we can do? How much do they cost? And then I would guide dollars there rather than, again, trying to generate sort of meta or ads or Google.
Okay. So you've got to work through the retailer of this. Like, for instance, you talk about like an in cap or in display unit.
Yep.
Like that's got to be pretty pricey, right? You're probably not making money on that, or
you're probably not making money dollar for dollar on that. You're hoping that the velocity on your ones on the shelf increases. Yeah. You add incremental, trial.
And then how competitive is it to be able to get that space? Like, are you fighting how many other brands for that?
Totally. So you're talking about like how available are these things?
And like
totally.
Is this something that you have to pitch once a year too, or it's like, oh, our sales are hurting, let me come in here and
for sure. So that's where, like, understand the suite of options. They all are incentivized to tell you what their suite of options are, and they want you to put money against it. Just like anything else, you wouldn't go to them and take what they say is Bible, right? You need to test all these things yourself. So you want to take the whole suite of options. You want to bucket those options by, do we dictate whether we can do this, or do you dictate whether we can do this? So all the things we dictate, a neck hanger or something we can do at any point in time. We pay for it, we do it. All they have to do is put them on there. So there's a list of things that you as the brand have control over. As long as you're willing to pay for it, you can do it. So you want to put that in bucket A. Bucket B is, they have control over this. How often do they have control over this? When can we do this thing, right? And it's not like testing anything from a marketing perspective. You're just going to say, first of all, understand the landscape. These things we can do anytime. These things you are in control of, and they can do at whatever frequency. Every quarter they open up an opportunity to do it. Or if you have a relationship with the buyer, you can just ask them. And then how hard is it to get? So all of that, just like anything else, says that these three things we can turn on at any point in time. We can go on a price discount, which isn't an anytime thing, but you get the point. Just have all those buckets so that you understand if we have to pull a lever, these are the ones that are available to us. These are the ones that they dictate. And so we're going to ask them if we can do it the next time it comes up for it. And we're going to test one thing at a time.
Are you guys getting third-party data from like Nielsen or?
Yeah, we get spins, point of sale data. Yeah.
And you find like how intensely are you viewing that and making adjustments based on that?
Very. It's interesting to me because, in the online world, I think analytics, data is part and parcel. You could argue we've gone overboard, and I would argue we've probably gone overboard with attribution and trying to get to the end of the rope on every dollar that's spent and how effective it is. But data is inherent when you launch a brand online. Data is a thing. Retail isn't necessarily, either because you don't know or you can't afford it is the more likely thing. This is expensive data. So category management is a function at MALK that has never been a function in a business I've been in before. And category management is understanding the point of sale data. What is happening in the category, in the subcategory, with our competitors at each retailer. So we have leaned in heavily, brought on a VP of category beginning of this year, who has experience doing all these things. So the short answer to the question is heavy. It's no different than having all of the analytics you look at online, from CPMs to click-through to conversion rate to AOV to LTV. Take all that juice that you have over there and apply it to point of sale data to understand when you go on promo, what's the incremental lift? When your competitors go on promo, how does that affect you if it affects you, right? At what price point are they selling at on average? It's called ARP, right? You're competitive. What's the gap between you and them? If you came down in price on a promotion, how effective was that? And should that lead to maybe you taking price down in general, right? Or up. And so all that, it's same, it's just different language, different vernacular, and probably a different human, because the human that's used to running AOV, LTV, all those other things doesn't understand point of sale data.
I want to circle back to the packaging design. Strategically speaking, what do you feel like is the best way to go? Like, if I have a new brand, I'm looking at shelf space. Do I want to be similar but slightly different? Do I want to be completely different? You guys clearly have like very bold. The brand is big and bold. You can see it from a mile away. Walk me through the strategy of how I would do a rebrand packaging wise to stand out in a crowded space.
I think it depends on the category, obviously, on how wild, quote unquote, you want to get, how different you want to be from the set. But at the end of the day, if your promise isn't clear, you need to make it clear. Your best chance, before you get to colors, just think about it like CRO, right, online. And like when people, the overly simplistic sort of lazy argument is just change the button color. When we all know that have been in that game, like it's a lot of other things. It's the copy, it's the hero image, it's all these other things. Same thing goes here. So what matters most is your promise. And what you alluded to earlier is like product, which we know product trumps all. If you don't have a real value proposition, i.e. you're building a bridge to some value proposition that maybe is there, that's going to be a challenge. But if you do, if you have a very real value proposition that's different than the rest of the competitive set, that has to be super clear immediately. So your promise and your value proposition has to be clear. Then you get to, yes, packaging design. What other attributes do you have that you can call out that the consumer cares about that matters? So if you think about it in hierarchy, what's your promise that no one else has? Ideally, you have one of those. What's your promise that very few other competitors have? And then you're trying to cross-reference that with the promise that consumers care about. If you have something that no one has, but no one cares about it, doesn't go on your hierarchy high, but like the perfect world, right? The consumers give a lot of cares about this thing that no one has or very few competitors of yours have. And so those have to be prominent on it. Before brand name, before color scheme, before popping of the packaging, it's like, what's the promise? What's your value proposition? And make sure they know that within a second of seeing that package on shelf.
And you have to be explicit with that. You can't do implied through, like fancy design or something like that, right?
Yes.
So the, the more words, the more information you put on the label is part of that strategy.
Yes, I think clearly, sort of copywriting 101, clear, not clever. Be very, very clear. If you can do it in a seal, that's where sort of design elements I think have more impact than what we sometimes believe, i.e. color, right? Can you put a button on the package that has it stand out a bit more and is very, very clear in what it is? Organic label is a great example, although maybe a lazy one, but the organic label, everyone knows what that is. So you have that, make sure that's prominent on your packaging, right? We have organic a couple different places on our packaging, but those are the types of things where design does matter. Can you fit this in such that it pops on the package, it's very, very clear, and the consumer knows exactly what it is when they see it. Sometimes that's words, sometimes that's a seal, sometimes that's buttons. you got to figure that out. But when you start walking retail shelves and you look at the brands that are winning, just look at those. When I first came up in the game, started running ads myself, you would just go to the ad library. You just look. What are the ads these people are running? Same thing. Go walk the retail shelves and look at your category, and then look at the other categories where brands are winning, and then take a look at their packaging and try to dissect why. What is their true value proposition to the market? Where did they put that on the package? And it will be different by category, but you'll have a much better sense just by looking, by opening your eyes and walking through and being like, oh, that's interesting. That's how they're doing that. And you can sort of reverse engineer it.
Yeah. Where can people follow you, learn from you, connect with you?
Yeah. Twitter and LinkedIn are the main places that I'm on. So you just look up my name, Ryan Rouse. And, if you want any healthy plant-based milk, you can always go to malkorganics.com.
There you go. Guys, this has been another e-commerce conversations. I hope you enjoyed it and learned as much as I learned. As always, thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Cheers.
Appreciate you, brother.
Keep on growing.
See ya.